My name is Lily Hart. The last time my father held my hand was the night he threw me out. I still remember how cold his fingers felt wrapped around mine. No warmth, no softness, just icy firmness. I stood frozen in the doorway, confused yet heartbreakingly aware of what was happening. "This is it, Lily," he said quietly, his eyes distant, emotionless. "You're not part of this family anymore?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I searched his face desperately, hoping for any sign of hesitation. But his expression was calculated and calm, as if he'd rehearsed these words countless times. He looked at me like a stranger, someone whose presence was no longer welcome. In his carefully constructed world, I wanted to ask why, to demand explanations for his cruelty. But deep down I knew the reasons. My choice to pursue law instead of obediently joining his company, my refusal to sign away the family home he was determined to sell. He couldn't accept my independence or tolerate my voice, so he chose to silence it completely. I stood there, clutching nothing but a duffel bag and my law degree. Behind me was everything I had ever known, every memory tied to this house, my mother's laughter, family dinners, quiet evenings spent reading by the fireplace. He believed stripping me of this home would strip away my strength. My throat burned with tears, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Without another word, I turned and stepped into the cold night. Each step away from my father echoing loudly in the silent darkness. In that moment, I promised myself one thing: I would never return crawling, begging for his mercy. He didn't realize it then, but the power he tried so desperately to take away was still mine, and he would soon learn just how fiercely I'd protect it. My father had always planned my life meticulously, as though I were just another transaction in his ledger. From childhood, he'd envisioned a future where I stood dutifully by his side, absorbing his wisdom, carrying his legacy forward. His expectations hung over me quietly but heavily, shaping every decision I made, or rather, every decision he made for me. But beneath his plans was a silent tension, current of resistance I felt every time I dared to imagine my own future. I remembered clearly the moment I first shared my dreams of studying law, the way his eyes hardened instantly, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the careful control in his voice when he responded with, "That's not the future I've built for you." Yet my mother had seen differently. Her gentle voice and reassuring smiles encouraged me to chase my passions quietly, even if that meant moving beyond my father's rigid boundaries. Late nights in the kitchen while he slept, she whispered affirmations of strength, telling me my dreams mattered too. I carried her quiet support like a shield, protective yet hidden from my father's scrutiny. Over the years, my father's disappointment hardened into resentment. Each step I took toward independence was silently catalogued, each achievement seen as a personal betrayal. He'd expected obedience. My defiance wounded him deeply, though he never showed it openly. Instead, he responded with cold distance, withholding affection, approval, and eventually, even basic respect. As I stood alone in the street that night, cast out from everything familiar, I felt the weight of those unspoken expectations clearly for the first time. But instead of crushing me, they became fuel. My father had wanted compliance, silence, submission, everything I refused to give him. Now, standing in the shadow of his rejection, I understood fully the price of my independence. And for the first time, I embraced it without apology. In the weeks following that night, I rebuilt my life quietly, moment by moment. My small apartment was sparse, filled only with essentials: a mattress on the floor, a makeshift desk, a few scattered books, each item a reminder of how much I'd lost, and yet how little I truly needed. I clung fiercely to the quiet dignity that had carried me out the door, refusing to show my father the pain I secretly carried. Days turned into silent rituals. I woke early each morning, brewing cheap coffee and reviewing legal briefs, burying myself in work to escape the emptiness echoing within. Evenings were hardest. Silence seeped into every corner of my tiny space, amplifying memories of family dinners, laughter, and warmth, things now replaced by isolation and uncertainty. Yet in those quiet hours something new emerged. A resilience grew steadily within me, invisible yet powerful. Every setback I faced, every challenge overcome, quietly reinforced my resolve. I learned to find strength in small victories, A new client secured, a bill successfully paid, a sleepless night turned productive. Late at night, sitting cross-legged on the bare floor, surrounded by scattered legal papers, I felt my mother's presence strongly. I remembered her quiet, steady confidence, her unwavering belief that I was stronger than my father's bitterness. Her words echoed softly, "You can always rebuild yourself, Lily. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Slowly, quietly, her belief became mine. The pain of betrayal did not vanish, but it became a foundation on which I carefully constructed my new identity. Each deliberate step forward was a silent declaration that I would not be defined by rejection or loss. I learned that resilience doesn't shout, it whispers. My strength was quiet but undeniable, steady but gentle, forged carefully from solitude and determination. Standing alone, I found the voice my father had tried so desperately to silence, a voice now stronger and clearer than ever. In the quiet solitude of my small apartment, late at night, I often thought about my mother. Memories of her flooded my mind gently, her warm laughter, the way she hummed softly in the kitchen, her comforting embrace. Yet beneath these tender moments lingered something else, subtle but insistent, the careful warnings she had whispered to me. The secretive glances she gave when my father spoke harshly. My mother had seen clearly what I hadn't fully grasped until too late. She had watched my father slowly transform, his warmth fading, replaced by a quiet cruelty. His growing greed became clearer to her long before I noticed. And quietly, she prepared for the storm she knew would eventually come. I remembered vividly the afternoon she'd called me aside, her voice gentle but firm. "Lily," she said softly, handing me an envelope. "You may need this someday." I hadn't fully understood then, but now, sitting alone in the dim light, holding those carefully prepared legal documents, I finally realized her quiet foresight. The deed to our family home, still bearing my mother's delicate signature, sat in my hands. My eyes traced over the lines, confirming the quiet transfer of power of attorney, naming me as custodian, guardian of her legacy. She had anticipated my father's actions, quietly safeguarding the house, and my dignity from his grasp. I recalled how, just weeks before my father had cast me out, I'd filed an injunction to stop him from selling our home. My mother's silent trust had given me the tools to protect the home she cherished deeply. This wasn't merely about property. It was about safeguarding her memory, honoring the quiet strength she'd embodied throughout her life. In that moment, I felt her presence beside me again, gently urging me forward, reminding me quietly yet powerfully of the responsibility she had entrusted to me. Her legacy wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was courage, foresight, and quiet resilience now living on through me. After the shock faded, I didn't let myself waste time on grief. There was too much at stake, too much my mother had entrusted to me. I had the documents, I had the legal authority. Now I had to make them count. I spent late nights surrounded by papers and glowing laptop screens, cross-referencing property law and family trust agreements, organizing every document my mother had quietly prepared. She had been smart. She hadn't told anyone, not even me at first, just left a quiet trail of protection, her final act of love. My father didn't know it yet, but I had already filed for an injunction before he ever threw me out. I had anticipated him, maybe. Not his cruelty, but certainly his intentions. He was greedy, transactional, and arrogant. He thought he could bulldoze over everything my mother built, everything she loved, because he assumed no one would stop him. But I wasn't the silent daughter anymore. The case came together piece by piece. Every clause in the deed, every timestamp on my filings, every line of my mother's handwritten notes became fuel. It wasn't just about legal defense. It was about standing up for something sacred. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was defending memory, dignity, and the quiet strength my mother had instilled in me. I knew he'd be confident, smug even, walking into that courtroom. He'd expect me to tremble, to falter. But I was done being afraid of him. I wasn't just prepared. I was fortified. As I tucked the final document into its folder and clicked the last file closed, I felt something settle in me. Not anger, not revenge, resolve. He thought he could erase me with one door slammed shut. What he didn't know was that I had been building the doorframe behind him quietly, precisely, legally, and I would be the one to walk through it, head high in the quiet days leading up to the court date. I stayed focused, determined not to be distracted by fear or doubt. But something happened that I didn't expect. People started reaching out softly at first, almost cautiously. It began with a message from Mrs. Donnelly, our neighbor for nearly 20 years. "Your mother would be proud," she wrote. Simple, unassuming, but it cracked something open in me. Soon after, others followed, former colleagues of my mother, old family friends, even a few of my father's past employees. They told me they'd seen what he'd become, how he'd changed since she passed. Some had wanted to speak up back then, but hadn't known how or hadn't felt it was their place. Now, they quietly rallied around me, some shared stories. Little details I'd forgotten or never known, like how my mother had refused to let my father rewrite the family trust, how she'd told more than one friend she had a backup plan if things ever turned dark. Others offered practical support, affidavits, timelines, witnesses. Not for a public crusade, but for truth. And it wasn't just their information that helped, it was their belief in me. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy for feeling what I'd felt, for seeing what I'd seen. My father had worked so hard to isolate me, to paint me as ungrateful, disloyal, defiant. But these people, these quiet voices from the past, they saw me. They saw her. They saw what he had tried to erase. Each message, each small act of support, became a thread, stitching together something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: community. Quiet, loyal, steadfast. I wasn't walking into that courtroom alone. And I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for all the people who had ever been silenced. And for the woman who made sure I never would be. The courthouse smelled like old paper and nerves. I sat in the front row, hands steady on my lap, folder of documents by my side. My heart was beating hard, but not out of fear, out of readiness. Out of years of silence, finally preparing to speak, he walked in confidently, flanked by his lawyer, perfectly pressed suit, eyes scanning the room like it already belonged to him. When he saw me, his mouth tightened, just a flicker. But I saw it. He hadn't expected me to show up like this, composed, prepared, unshaken. The proceedings began. His team presented their case first, outlining his intent to sell the house, citing years of maintenance, claiming it was in the family's best interest. I listened quietly, resisting every urge to scoff, to cry, to stand and shout. I waited. Then the judge called my name. "Miss Lily Hart, please approach." I stood, walked forward, slow, steady, no tremble in my step. What followed felt surreal. I introduced myself. Submitted the deed still in my mother's name. Submitted the power of attorney she had signed. Submitted the injunction I had filed before my father even locked the front door behind me. The judge examined each one carefully. When he looked up and said, "As it stands, Miss Hart is the legal owner of the property," the room went still. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to, but I heard it, his stammer.
"His attorney."
Asking for clarification. And then, the moment that will live with me forever, he addressed me directly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracked. "Could we—" "No, I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. I looked ahead, hands folded calmly, while the courtroom watched him shrink. Because that day, in front of everyone, I wasn't just my father's daughter. I was the owner of the house. I was the voice he couldn't silence. It didn't take long for the tone in the courtroom to shift. His confidence unraveled, thread by thread, as the truth laid itself bare. For once, his words didn't command the room. The judge wasn't moved by his attempts to reframe history, to present himself as the victim of an ungrateful child. His lawyer's voice grew thinner with each objection overruled, each document upheld. I stayed calm. I didn't gloat. I didn't argue. I let the evidence speak, let the facts do what years of my silence could not. Because this wasn't about spectacle, it was about reclaiming what was mine. What had always been mine. My father had always thrived on power. He assumed his name, his presence, his money would protect him. That the world would believe him, just like he'd always expected me to. But the courtroom didn't bend to his will the way his house had. I watched him falter on the stand. watched his hands tremble ever so slightly as he tried to explain why he hadn't known the deed had changed. His voice cracked again when the judge reminded him that the legal documents were clear, signed and filed before he had even tried to initiate the sale. The moment that sealed it came quietly. As I gathered my things, the judge looked at me with a nod of respect and said, "You've done your mother proud." I felt something tighten in my throat but held it together. I wasn't going to cry. Not here, not now, and still. I never looked back at him, not when he stumbled over his words, not when he realized he'd lost, not even when he whispered my name as I walked past, because I had nothing to prove to him anymore. That courtroom was my turning point. His fall, my rise. When I stepped outside the courthouse, the sky felt different, brighter, wider, open. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The air felt like mine again. No longer heavy with expectation or silence or the weight of someone else's legacy. I had one, but it wasn't just about the house, or even the case. It was about the space I had created for myself through pain, through persistence, through every moment I chose not to shrink. I had walked into that courtroom with nothing but the truth and the strength my mother gave me. And I walked out with something far more valuable than property. I walked out with my voice. Later that evening, I returned to the house not as a guest, not as a child afraid of tiptoeing around someone else's authority. I unlocked the door with my own key, stepped inside as the rightful owner. The scent of old wood and familiar air wrapped around me like a long-forgotten memory. I walked through each room slowly, tracing my fingers over the walls, the staircase, the windows she used to clean with quiet care. It was still her home. And now it was mine too. I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for ceremony, not for drama. Just to sit, to breathe. To feel. I thought of her. Of the quiet ways she'd prepared me. Of the strength she planted like seeds in the moments I hadn't even noticed. This wasn't a return. This was a beginning. A reclamation. The house wasn't a symbol of victory over him, it was a testament to her. To me. To the quiet power of a woman who refused to be erased. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept with the door unlocked, because I was finally home. There's a moment, after the dust settles, when you finally hear yourself again, no more shouting matches in your head, no more what-ifs or phantom arguments replaying themselves late at night. Just silence, and not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that holds you. That cradles your courage gently and says, "You made it." That's what it felt like, standing in the middle of the living room where I once tiptoed quietly, afraid to make noise. I wasn't afraid anymore. This house, this battle, my story, it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming the parts of me I'd been forced to silence. The daughter who learned to stay small. The woman who was told her dreams were disobedience. The voice I had swallowed one too many times to keep the peace. My father had tried to take everything from me, my place, my power, my right to say no. And for a while he almost did. But the beauty of truth, of quiet resilience, is that it doesn't vanish under pressure. It waits, it gathers. It learns to speak when it matters most. I think about my mother every day now. Her picture sits on the mantel, framed in warmth and soft gold. I see her eyes in mine when I look in the mirror. I feel her strength in the way I stand straighter, speak louder, lie freer. People sometimes ask if I've spoken to him since. The answer is no, not because I'm bitter, but because I no longer need to be heard by someone who chose not to listen. I reclaim the house. I reclaim the legacy. But most of all, I reclaim my voice, and I'll never let it go silent again.